Hi there, listeners. Tonight, I will take you not to lavish halls, but to the narrow streets of a quiet village covered in snow. Smoke rises slowly from the roofs of the huts, like breath escaping from the cold. The snow crunches with every step, but the village is silent. Very silent. Here, winter is not just the name of the cold. It is a guest that approaches slowly, wearing down your patience, seeping into your bones. If such slow and deep historical stories bring you peace, it would be nice if you liked the video and subscribed, but only if it truly comforts you. Sharing where you listened to it and what time it was in the comments is as comforting as knowing there are others here experiencing this moment with you. First, the sky changes from blue to a reluctant gray. Then the animals notice the chickens stay in the coop longer. The dogs don't bark at the wind, they just listen, as if they know something you don't. In your cabin, the wind seeps through the cracks in the walls, searching the corners of the room. You reach out, find the only warm spot by the stove, and push it away. Food grows scarce. The bread that was soft yesterday is as hard as stone today. A thin layer of ice forms on the surface of the water in the bucket, and you know this is only the beginning. Dim the lights. Wrap your blanket around your shoulders. Come, let's discover together how the villagers survived the harshest winter of the Middle Ages. The first task was always denial. You'd pretend the cold was temporary. You'd pull on your worn tunic, maybe a threadbare cloak. You'd tell yourself you'd mend it, but you never would. The needle was bent, thread gone, fingers to numb. Most winters arrived before you finished autumn's chores. A roof unrepaired, would unchapped garden produce unpreserved, now doomed to rot. Still, you did what you could. You'd stuff straw into wall cracks to plug drafts. You'd drape thick cloth over the doorway, a meager barrier against the relentless wind. Inside, beds were pushed closer to the central hearth, the only true heat source. Everyone slept tighter, sharing what precious body heat they could. Even Uncle Gan, smelling of sheep and muttering in his sleep, was a valuable snoring radiator. Fires weren't lit all day. That was a luxury. Wood was for evenings, for cooking the meager meal, and for the brief hour when everyone forced a strained cheerfulness. The rest of the time, you relied on constant movement, layering every scrap of fabric you owned. And the communal heat of reluctant family members pressed together under one scratchy, often vermin-ridden, woolen blanket. The animals sensed it too, their instincts sharper than any humans. They lingered longer near the cottage, their spirits subdued. Chickens huddled in tight masses. Pigs went quiet, unsettlingly still. Owls grew more irritable, their discomfort palpable, their low moans sounding like guttural complaints. Outside, the ground began its grim transformation, turning to iron. Paths were treacherous, half-frozen ruts that twisted ankles. Water in the bucket developed a thick skin of ice by morning. You'd break it with a ladle, cursing as the icy splash numbed your hands. The sky just hung there, low, gray, pregnant with unspoken menace, like it was waiting for something terrible. Its leaden presence meant no proper sun for weeks, perhaps months. In the small, struggling town, people walked faster, steps quick and purposeful. They spoke in clipped, efficient sentences. No room for pleasantries. Jokes dried up, no one was in the mood. Even church sermons grew darker. The priest reminding everyone cold was God's stern way of encouraging humility. You often wondered if God might try a warmer lesson plan. And then, finally, one morning, it happened. Snow. Not a blizzard, not yet. Just a delicate dusting, like tiny white flowers, spilled across the fallow fields, softening harsh edges. But it changed everything. Thatch turned pristine white, trees stiffened. Your breath came out in little clouds. Every step outside sounded like treading on old parchment, a crisp, unsettling rustle. With that first snow came the crushing realization. You were locked in now. The earth had closed up shop for the season. No more digging, no more planting. What you had stored was all you had, a finite and terrifyingly small reserve. If it wasn't enough, you'd learn just how thin stew could really get. You began to count things differently, not in endless days, but in shrinking bundles. How many bundles of firewood were left? Each one felt lighter, more precious. How many sacks of grain remained? How many withered turnips? How many eggs this week? Not many. Hens stopped laying when cold, preferring to huddle near the dwindling fire. You kept yourself busy, relentlessly so, even if unproductive. Mending clothes, scraping pans, stirring ashes, hoping for a warm coal. If there was time, you'd spin wool to keep hands moving, mind occupied. Too much quiet, too much idleness, and your thoughts started getting ideas dark, unsettling whispers of despair. The animals weren't just company. They were cohabitants, vital, if sometimes smelly. Warmer ones, like the goat or favored chickens, were explicitly invited inside, near the hearth. Not all at once, but enough to turn the house into a communal stew of smells, sounds, and shared body heat. You'd get used to waking up with a goat breathing its warm, pungent breath on your neck or learn to stop fighting it. Evenings were the worst. The sun disappeared too early, darkness arriving angrily. Candles were expensive. Rush lights burned smoky, sputtering flames barely piercing the gloom. You'd sit near the fire, if one was going, and listen. 2 stories to the wind howling its mournful song, 2 wood hissing. Sometimes a ghost story felt like a good idea until you realized you do have to run across the freezing, pitch-black yard to the privy afterward. You'd stumble, definitely not looking into the deeper shadows that seemed to hold unspeakable things. And yet, medieval winter wasn't entirely misery. There was a grim, bitter predictability. You knew the chores, the limits, and there was a strange raw camaraderie in knowing everyone else was equally miserable. You learned to find comfort in the smallest, most fleeting victories. Warm feet for 5 minutes. A stew tasting slightly less like despair. A day without the wind cutting through the walls. You celebrated quietly because laughing too loud would bring the grim reminder. We've only just begun. Historically, peasants didn't fare too well. The Little Ice Age 14th century brought harsher, longer winters. Rivers froze for months, halting trade. Crops failed for entire seasons. In 1315 to 1317, the Rhine froze solid and markets were held on ice, claiming lives. These were famine years. Heavy rains ruined crops, leading to starvation affecting 30 million. When no food, people got unimaginative. Cannibalism and infanticide were whispered horrors. But that's the true thing about winter. It's not just about enduring the cold. It's about enduring each other. A family of 6, 3 goats, 2 chickens, and salted fish in 20 square feet was a social experiment with no exit. You heard every cough, every complaint, every digestive sound. Privacy was a myth. Modesty vanished. You did your best not to argue, not out of patience, but to avoid stirring air and letting in more cold. So you settled in. You shrunk your world to a few feet around the fire. You learned the weight of every blanket, the creak of every board, the weather's rhythm. Days shortened, nights lengthened. Time dissolved into a frozen soup. You weren't living, you were enduring. Eventually, you stopped asking how long winter would last. You just woke up and survived that day. If lucky, firewood held out. If very lucky, the roof did too. Because in medieval winter, the cold didn't knock. It let itself in and stayed. And tomorrow, it would all start again. The cycle of cold, hunger, and struggle, endless and relentlessly repetitive. The days bled into each other, marked less by the sun's reluctant arc across the perpetually gray sky, and more by the steadily diminishing woodpile outside the hut. The first snow, initially a deceptively soft blanket, had now hardened into an unforgiving, icy crust that crunched underfoot with every perilous step. Your world shrank to the immediate confines of the small, drafty hut. Its humble wattle and daub walls, a fragile, often creaking, barrier against the vast, consuming white wilderness that pressed in from all sides. Life became a meticulous ritual of conservation, a daily battle against depletion. Every ember in the central hearth was cherished, treated with reverence, carefully coaxed back to life with gentle, deliberate puffs of breath and precisely placed twigs, each one a tiny act of survival. You learned to read the smoke, its subtle shifts a silent, crucial language. A thin, lazy wisp curling towards the smoke hole meant the fire was content, burning efficiently. A thick, choking plume, however, was an ominous sign, meaning the wood was damp, smoldering rather than burning or worse. That the chimney was blocked a potential death sentence of smoke inhalation that could steal your breath as surely as the cold. Food, what little there was, governed every waking thought, every desperate calculation. The salted fish, brittle and gray, tasted not just of the sea, but of a distant, almost mythical memory of warmer, more abundant times. The dried turnips, fibrous and bland, were stretched into thin, watery stews, their meager substance barely touching the sides of your stomach. You ate slowly, each bite a conscious effort to prolong the sensation, to trick the gnawing emptiness in your stomach, to make a little last a little longer. Children, usually boisterous and demanding, grew quieter, their youthful energy subdued by the constant cold and hunger. Their wide eyes tracked every spoonful, every morsel of food, their hunger a constant, unspoken pressure. A weight on your chest heavier than any winter cloak. You try to tell them stories of summer, of plump berries bursting with juice, and fields of ripe, golden grain, trying desperately to fill their minds with something other than the emptiness in their bellies. Sometimes it worked, and a flicker of hope or wonder would cross their faces. Sometimes their eyes just glazed over, lost in the stark, cold reality that contradicted your gentle fables. The light inside was a precious commodity, a luxury rarely indulged. Candles, painstakingly made from hoarded tallow, were reserved for tasks demanding precision, mending a torn fishing net that represented future meals, sharpening a dull knife essential for daily chores, or carefully patching worn leather. Most evenings passed in semi-darkness, illuminated only by the flickering, dancing glow of the hearth, painting transient shadows on the rough walls. You learned to navigate your cramped home by touch, your hands knowing the familiar bumps and cracks of the walls, the worn edges of the table, the precise location of every stool and sleeping mat. Voices became hushed, almost conspiratorial, as if loud noises would invite the cold in, shattering the fragile warmth you desperately clung to. The air, thick with the earthy smell of smoke, damp earth, unwashed bodies, and the faint, musky scent of animals, was breathed in deeply, a constant, heavy presence that coated your lungs. Sleep offered a temporary, welcome escape, a few hours of oblivion where the cold seemed less sharp, the hunger less urgent, a brief respite from the relentless struggle. But even in sleep, you were acutely aware of the shared breath of those huddled around you, the faint rustle of mice in the thatch above, the ceaseless whisper of the wind trying to find its insidious way inside, a constant threat to your peace. Outside, the landscape transformed into a brutal, often terrifying, yet starkly beautiful wilderness. The trees stood stark and skeletal, their branches laden with impossibly heavy snow, occasionally cracking under the weight with a sound like a distant gunshot echoing through the frozen air. Animal tracks, once plentiful in autumn's mud, became scarce, then vanished altogether, swallowed by fresh falls or covered by drifts. Only the boldest, most desperate creatures dared to venture close to human settlements, their hunger overriding their natural fear. You heard the wolves, their mournful, chilling howls cutting through the vast silence of the night, a terrifying reminder of the ever-present danger that lurked just beyond the hut's flimsy walls, a threat that grew more immediate with each passing day of hunger. Every trip to the privy, a necessary evil regardless of the weather, became a terrifying ordeal. You'd dash out, eyes wide, heart pounding against your ribs. convinced something unseen lurked in the deeper shadows beyond the pale glow of the hut, waiting for your moment of vulnerability. Chores remained, relentless and unyielding, dictating the very rhythm of your days. The village well often froze solid, requiring back-breaking effort to chip away at the ice, sometimes for hours, using crude tools that bit painfully into your frozen hands. Just to retrieve a single bucket of water, each icy drop felt like a hard-won victory. Collecting firewood became an increasingly dangerous expedition. The nearest easily accessible branches were long gone, consumed in previous weeks, forcing you further into the silent. Snow-choked forest, each step a gamble against hidden ice, treacherous drifts, and the unseen dangers of the deep woods. You'd drag back what you could, arms aching with exhaustion, fingers numb with cold, the weight of the wood a tangible burden of survival, a literal representation of your dwindling chances. Women spent endless hours spinning wool, their hands raw and chapped from the cold and constant friction. The monotonous worry of the spindle, a constant backdrop to the quiet hum of the hut. A drone that sometimes felt like the hum of your own despair. Men, when not hunting or gathering, mended tools, sharpened blades, or fashioned new items from dried leather or bone. Their movements slow and deliberate, every action conserving precious, rapidly dwindling energy. Community became an anchor, albeit a fragile one, in the vast ocean of winter's isolation. The village, usually a bustling hub of activity in warmer months, now hunkered down, its houses isolated by snowdrifts taller than a man. Impassable barriers that cut off connection. Trade ceased almost entirely. News, if any, trickled in slowly, often weeks old, carried by the most desperate or foolhardy travelers who braved the treacherous roads. Sickness was a constant, insidious threat, a silent reaper that claimed lives with brutal efficiency. A simple cough could turn into a death rattle overnight, a chilling reminder of your own vulnerability. The old and the young were most vulnerable, their fragile lives extinguished by ailments that, in warmer months, would be mere inconveniences, easily overcome. When someone died, the ground was often too frozen solid to dig a grave. The body would be wrapped in a shroud and stored, sometimes in a cold shed, sometimes tragically in a corner of the hut itself, until the spring thaw allowed for a proper burial. The quiet dignity of death, a common ritual, was replaced by a grim, heartbreaking practicality. Despite the omnipresent hardship, moments of unexpected, fleeting beauty sometimes pierced the gloom. The way the moonlight shone on the fresh snow, transforming the familiar world outside into a landscape of shimmering silver, stark and breathtaking. The sudden, brief, glorious warmth of a newly lit fire, its flames dancing with defiant light. The simple pleasure of a story told by the hearth, its ancient words drawing everyone closer, their faces illuminated by the dancing flames, momentarily forgetting the cold. These were not grand celebrations, no feasts or revelry, but quiet, profound moments of shared humanity, small pockets of resilience, a testament to the enduring human spirit, even in the face of overwhelming odds. You learn to appreciate the smallest comforts, the coarse scratch of a wool blanket against your skin, the familiar weight of a sleeping child pressed against your side, the low murmur of conversation that filled the darkness. A comforting human sound in an inhuman world. These were the tenuous threads that kept you from unraveling, the tiny, flickering lights in an otherwise endless, suffocating night. The sense of time itself warped and blurred. Days didn't pass as distinct units. They simply were indistinguishable from one another. Winter felt eternal, not merely a season, but a permanent state of being. The concept of spring seemed a distant, almost mythical promise, a comforting tale told to keep spirits from breaking, but one you increasingly doubted. You stopped looking at the skies for signs of change, for the leaden gray never lifted. You stopped listening for the cheerful chirp of returning birds, for only the hungry caw of ravens broke the suffocating silence. Your entire existence was defined by the present, by the immediate primal needs of warmth and hunger, by the constant, low thrum of survival that vibrated through your very bones. Every ache, every shiver, every gnawing pang of hunger was a brutal, undeniable reminder of the season's unforgiving power. Yet, within that relentless pressure, a deep, silent resilience formed, a quiet, stubborn determination to see another dawn, to face another day. It wasn't a conscious choice, it was simply what you did, the only path available. You endured, you survived. For now, the deep winter truly arrived, not with a sudden dramatic storm that announced its presence with fury, but with an insidious, profound quiet that gradually blanketed the entire world. The snow, once a delicate, ephemeral dust, now lay impossibly thick and unbroken, silencing even the faintest whisper of the wind, absorbing all sound. Every distant noise was muffled, swallowed by the endless, pristine white. The sharp crack of a tree branch under too much accumulated snow, the haunting, distant howl of a lone wolf echoing across the frozen plains. The insistent creak of the hut's ancient timbers under the immense, crushing weight of the cold. Each sound seemed strangely amplified in the profound stillness, then quickly absorbed into the vast, silent expanse. The sun became more than a forgotten memory. It was a mythical concept, replaced by a permanent, diffuse twilight, a weak, grudging light that barely pierced the heavy, steel-gray sky that pressed down upon the land. It was a monochromatic world, defined by stark white, endless gray, and the deep, pervasive blue of bone-chilling, unyielding cold. The cold now infiltrated everything, seeping into the very core of existence. It wasn't just outside, a distant threat. It clung to the very air inside the hut, a palpable presence despite the flickering, struggling fire in the hearth. Your breath still plumed in small, visible clouds, tiny ghosts of warmth, even as you huddled closer to the meager, radiating glow. Water left in a cup by the hearth, a forgotten necessity, would develop a thin, brittle skin of ice overnight, a chilling reminder of the cold's pervasive reach. Clothes hung optimistically to dry near the fire would stiffen into frozen caricatures of themselves, rigid and unyielding. Every movement was a deliberate struggle, your muscles protesting, aching against the constant, biting chill that seemed to seep into your very bones. Your fingers ached perpetually, a dull, throbbing pain. Your toes felt like unfeeling lumps of wood, heavy and unresponsive. And your nose was a constant, raw, irritated torment. The cold became a physical entity, a relentless, omnipresent companion that pressed in from all sides, testing the very limits of your physical and mental endurance, grinding down your will. Days merged into a monotonous, indistinguishable cycle of bare survival. The main objective was stripped bare, simply to remain alive, to make it to the next reluctant sunrise, to simply be. Waking was a profound challenge, forcing your stiff, aching limbs from the scratchy, insufficient blankets into the icy, unwelcoming air of the hut. The fire, if it hadn't died completely into a bed of cold ashes, needed immediate, desperate tending, coaxing back to life. Then came the endless, soul-crushing task of managing dwindling supplies. Each hard-won ration was carefully weighed in your palm, each portion decided with a grim, heartbreaking precision, a silent calculation of future hunger. The children's eyes, hollowed by constant hunger, watched every single move, every portion. You'd catch glimpses of raw desperation in their quiet faces, a silent, pleading anguish that gnawed relentlessly at your soul, worse than your own hunger. Telling stories, once a comforting ritual, became harder. Hope was a fragile thing, easily crushed by the relentless, brutal reality that pressed in from all sides. Hunting and foraging, once slim chances even in milder winters, now became near impossible, a fool's errand. The forest was a formidable fortress of impenetrable ice and impossibly deep snow. Its few remaining inhabitants either in the deepest throes of hibernation or long since vanished, having fled the unforgiving landscape. Traps set days ago would be completely covered by fresh snow, buried and forgotten, the bait frozen solid and useless. If you did manage by some unimaginable stroke of luck to snag a scrawny rabbit or a desperate bird, it was nothing short of a miracle celebrated with a rare, fleeting surge of frantic energy, a brief moment of immense relief that quickly faded back into the persistent, overarching fear of the next day's inevitable hunger. The frozen ground yielded absolutely nothing. Not a single root could be dug, not a single hardy winter green could be found. The only food available was what remained in precarious storage. A dwindling, heartbreaking testament to autumn's fading bounty. A ticking clock of survival. The social fabric of the village, once robust and close-knit by shared hardship, began to fray visibly under the relentless pressure of the deep winter. People who once shared resources freely grew more withdrawn, their faces gaunt, their eyes wary and suspicious. Whispers of hoarding, of unfair sharing, of increasingly scarce resources circulated like a chilling, unseen draft through the small community. Charity, once a given and unspoken communal law, became a rare, highly calculated risk, measured against one's own family's likely starvation. Neighbors who would readily share a loaf of bread or a handful of grain in warmer, more forgiving times, now eyed their own meager stores with a desperate, possessive glint. Desperation bred resentment, and the bonds of community stretched thin, strained to breaking point, sometimes snapping entirely under the immense stress. The profound silence of the deep winter wasn't just from the all-absorbing snow. It was the heavy, oppressive silence of people drawing inward, protecting what little sustenance, what little hope they had left, even from each other. Sickness, as always, was the unspoken horror, the unseen enemy that stalked every hut. The air, trapped inside the poorly ventilated dwellings, became a breeding ground for relentless coughs, burning fevers, and insidious contagions. A hacking cough from one family member could sweep through an entire household, then an entire village, decimating their already fragile numbers with terrifying speed. With no medicine beyond simple, often ineffective, herbal remedies, most illnesses ran their grim course, often ending in a quiet, painful, and inevitable death. The ground remained utterly frozen, making proper burials impossible for weeks, sometimes months. So bodies were often kept, wrapped in humble shrouds and preserved by the very cold that claimed them, until the spring thaw allowed for a proper, respectful burial. This grim, undeniable reality hung over every interaction, a constant, chilling reminder of mortality, of how easily a precious life could be extinguished by the indifferent, merciless cold. Yet, amidst this stark, brutal struggle, tiny moments of profound human resilience flickered, like tiny defiant flames against the vast consuming darkness. The communal spinning of wool, hands moving in unison, offered a shared rhythm, a silent understanding that transcended words, a small comfort in shared monotony. The soft, gentle murmur of a mother singing a lullaby to her shivering child. Her voice a fragile, defiant comfort against the harsh, undeniable realities. The shared silence around the fire, a mutual, unspoken acceptance of their grim, desperate fate, yet a stubborn, unyielding refusal to break, to surrender. These were not moments of grand joy or revelry, but of enduring connection, of small, whispered acts of quiet defiance against despair. You felt the silent, collective strength of your many ancestors, who had faced countless, equally brutal winters before you, who had passed down this very stubbornness. This was their enduring legacy, a deep, ingrained ability to simply keep going. One breath, one meager meal, one shivering, unending night at a time, a testament to the sheer will to exist. Hope became less about a grand, assured outcome, and more about the simple, fundamental act of continuing, of enduring one more moment. The isolation became profound, a suffocating blanket woven from snow and ice. Roads were utterly impassable, burying villages in drifts taller than a man, cutting them off from the outside world entirely, severing all contact. Travelers, if they dared to brave the treacherous conditions, often perished, swallowed by blizzards or succumbing to the cold. The only contact was with those immediately around you, day after day, week after week, month after month. This forced intimacy could be both an unbearable burden and, paradoxically, a strange, profound comfort. You knew every sigh, every cough, every restless turn of your family members in the dark. There was no escape from each other or from the relentless, grinding reality of winter. The world outside the hut became a blur of featureless white, indistinguishable, hostile, and utterly vast. Time stretched, distending into an endless, shapeless continuum, a frozen river that no longer flowed. The past became a hazy, distant memory of warmth and abundance, of plump berries and sunshine, almost too good to be true. The future was an uncertain, terrifying void, a blank page of unknown suffering. Only the immediate present mattered, the desperate need for warmth, for sustenance, for just one more day of existence. The wind's mournful howl against the frozen walls, a constant, lonely lament. The crack of strained timbers threatening to give way, the pervasive, aching cold in your very bones. These were the only markers left of passing time. You lived in a state of primal, heightened awareness. Your senses sharpened by deprivation, your focus narrowed to the absolute essential. And through it all, the deep winter tightened its relentless embrace, a slow, agonizing squeeze, demanding everything you had, leaving only the bare, raw, unbroken will to survive. It was an existence defined by the cold, a testament to endurance. As the deep winter solidified its icy, unyielding grip, a new, far more insidious enemy emerged. One that attacked from within: hunger. It wasn't merely an empty feeling in the belly, a fleeting discomfort. It was a constant, gnawing presence, a deep, hollow ache that seeped into your very bones, clouding your every thought and relentlessly sapping your remaining strength. Every single movement now required immense, agonizing effort, as if your limbs were suddenly filled with lead, heavy and unresponsive. The entire world narrowed to the relentless, all-consuming pursuit of bare sustenance. Dreams became tormenting visions of lavish feasts and plump, roasted game, only to awaken to the stark, brutal reality of an utterly empty, echoing larder, your stomach twisting in protest. The family, once a cherished source of shared warmth and comfort, became a collection of gaunt, increasingly silent figures. Children, their faces thinner and more drawn with each passing day, moved with a listless, unnerving slowness, their usual boundless energy extinguished by deprivation. Their eyes, once bright with curiosity and life, now held an unnerving stillness, a desperate, staged patience that chilled you to your core. You rationed the meager, pathetic scraps of food with painstaking, agonizing care, each portion agonizingly small, barely enough to sustain a bird. A single turnip, once a humble, common vegetable, was now sliced into paper-thin pieces, stretched across several days. A desperate attempt to prolong its meager, life-giving properties. The salted fish, already dry and tough, became like brittle wood, offering little comfort or true nourishment. Every chew was deliberate, every swallow a victory against the encroaching void, a desperate act of defiance. Conversations about food ceased entirely. It was too painful, too real, too dangerous to discuss. The animals, too, suffered profoundly, their plight mirroring your own desperate struggle. The goat, once sturdy and relatively plump, became frail and skeletal, its ribs showing starkly beneath its shaggy, thinning coat, its bleating now a weak, mournful sound. The chickens, usually a reliable source of eggs, stopped laying entirely, their entire meager energy devoted solely to the grim task of keeping warm, conserving what little life remained within them. Their suffering was a constant, silent testament to the winter's unforgiving, merciless reach. Some families in the village, driven to the absolute brink, had already slaughtered their last remaining livestock, a heart-wrenching, soul-crushing decision that brought a temporary, fleeting reprieve from immediate hunger, quickly followed by the crushing, devastating realization that there was now absolutely nothing left, no further recourse. The chilling echoes of these desperate choices, whispered from hut to hut like a winter ghost, were a grim, terrifying foreshadowing of what might yet come for everyone. The cold, an ever-present, suffocating presence, made hunger infinitely more acute, more biting. Your body, struggling desperately to produce any warmth, burned through its meager, dwindling reserves faster than ever before. Shivering became a constant, uncontrollable state, a violent tremor that further drained your already depleted energy, leaving you exhausted. Even by the hearth, where the dying embers flickered weakly, the warmth felt utterly insufficient, a thin, transparent veil against the penetrating, bone-deep chill that seemed to seep in from every direction. Sleep offered little true rest. You'd wake frequently, jolted awake by the relentless hunger pangs or the pervasive, aching cold. Pulling your threadbare blankets tighter, shivering uncontrollably until the first reluctant light of morning. The line between waking and dreaming blurred in the hazy, tormented state of exhaustion and severe malnutrition. Thoughts of food mingling with the cold reality. The desperate search for any food now extended to the very edge of survival, bordering on the suicidal. Hunters, once proud and capable providers, returned empty-handed more often than not, their faces etched with grim, palpable defeat. Their shoulders slumped in despair. The forest, now a vast, trackless, hostile white expanse, offered no bounty whatsoever. Even the most desperate scavenging for frozen, shriveled berries or hidden, petrified roots became utterly futile. The ground iron-hard, the sparse growth buried beneath impossible, impenetrable layers of snow and ice. There were whispers growing louder and more frequent with each passing, agonizing week of truly desperate acts, of families abandoning their weakest members on perilous journeys for food, of unthinkable, horrifying choices, made in the cruel, merciless name of survival. The shadow of despair deepened, an almost tangible, suffocating weight in the frigid air, pressing down on every soul. Community ties, already strained and frayed by the relentless pressure, now began to unravel completely, snapping under the impossible burden. Suspicion turned to outright, raw hostility. Bartering, once a foundational way of life, became fraught with tension and distrust, each exchange a potential argument. A neighbor who would readily share a loaf of bread or a handful of grain in warmer, more forgiving times, now might refuse a desperate plea for a handful of flour, their own paralyzing fear of starvation outweighing any lingering sense of shared humanity or moral obligation. Stories of theft, of desperate raids on meager food stores, circulated like a dangerous contagion, turning neighbors into potential threats, objects of fear and resentment. The shared misery that once fostered unity now seemed to breed deep division, each family becoming an isolated, desperate island, battling the encroaching darkness alone, adrift in a sea of snow. The church's sermons, once a source of comfort and spiritual guidance, now seemed hollow, their promises of a merciful God clashing brutally with the stark, brutal reality of daily existence and widespread suffering. The threat of disease, too, intensified exponentially with the onset of severe hunger. Weakened, emaciated bodies were highly susceptible to every passing ailment, their defenses utterly compromised. A simple cough, once a mere warning, now felt like a terrifying death knell, echoing ominously in the small hut. Fevers, often unstoppable, ravaged families, often leaving empty spaces by the hearth, haunting reminders of lives extinguished. The chilling, undeniable truth was that hunger didn't just starve you slowly. It made you profoundly vulnerable to every other peril of winter, stripping away all defenses. The dead, still unburied in the perpetually frozen ground, were a constant, silent reminder of winter's brutal, relentless toll. their unmoving presence a haunting, heavy weight on the living, a grim prophecy. Yet even in this bleak, agonizing landscape, the primal, unyielding will to survive, rooted deep in the human spirit, stubbornly persisted. It wasn't a conscious, logical choice, but an instinctive, guttural refusal to surrender, to simply give in. You'd find yourself performing routine tasks, knitting fingers raw with effort, chopping wood until your back screamed in protest. Simply because stopping meant succumbing, meant giving up the fight. The tiny flickering ember of hope was no longer about spring's grand, triumphant arrival, but about enduring just the next hour, surviving the next breath, making it to the next uncertain sunrise. It was a profound testament to the sheer, stubborn, biological imperative to live, to simply exist, even when life itself offered nothing but pain, deprivation, and unending suffering. The pervasive silence of the hut was punctuated only by the shallow, ragged breathing of sleeping forms, the soft, melancholic crackle of the dying fire, and the relentless, almost sentient, grinding sound of the wind, a constant lament against the frozen walls. You clung to life with every fiber of your being. Just when the silence felt eternal and the cold seemed an unbreaking state of being, an immutable force, a subtle shift began to ripple through the world. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic burst of warmth, no grand fanfare, but a mere whisper, a tentative promise that, against all odds, stirred the deepest, most weary corners of your soul. You noticed it first, not with your eyes, but in the imperceptible quality of the light. The oppressive steel-gray sky, which had pressed down like a lead blanket for months, lightened just barely, allowing a fraction more of a diffused, almost silvery glow to penetrate the hut's small, grimy, begrimed window. The oppressive, suffocating darkness of the perpetual twilight began its slow, grudging recession, yielding, minute by agonizing minute, to a longer, more hopeful day. The sounds changed, too subtly at first, then growing more distinct. The wind's mournful, ceaseless howl, once a constant, soul-chilling lament against the frozen walls now seemed to pause, catching its breath, taking a moment of respite. A faint, almost imperceptible drip, drip. Drip began to echo from the thatch roof directly above your head, a tiny, tentative music that, against all logic, meant the accumulated snow was finally, definitively conceding its dominance. It was barely audible at first, a sound you had to strain to hear, but once your ears registered it, you couldn't unhear it. It was the undeniable sound of winter loosening its relentless grip, one precious, hopeful drop at a time, a trickle of future life. The ground still held its iron hardness, a stubborn resistance to the coming warmth. But there was a faint, almost miraculous give in places where the sun's weak. Hesitant rays lingered longest a minuscule yielding that hinted with intoxicating promise at future softness at fertile earth. The hut, which had felt like a confining tomb, a prison of cold and hunger, now seemed less oppressive, less confining, almost breathable. The air inside, though still undeniably frigid, felt subtly different, carrying a faint, fresh scent that had nothing to do with stale smoke, damp earth, or unwashed bodies. It smelled faintly of distant, melting snow, of renewed possibility. The collective breathing of the family felt a little lighter, less strained, less desperate. Even the animals, their instincts far more finely tuned than yours, seemed to sense the profound change in the very fabric of the season. The chickens, still huddled for warmth, clucked with a fraction more vigor, a low, contented rumble. The goat stirred restlessly, a new, almost eager note in its bleating, a palpable anticipation of freedom. Their ancient instincts, honed over countless generations to nature's rhythms, were registering the unseen shift, a quiet hum of awakening beneath the frozen, silent world. The first truly tangible sign of winter's weakening grip was the water. The thick, stubborn ice on the village well, which you had battled with aching limbs for months, began to visibly thin, becoming translucent in places. One morning, the ladle didn't just crack a brittle surface with a familiar, frustrating resistance. It plunged through, meeting liquid below with a satisfying, almost joyful splash. The water, though still biting icy cold, flowed more freely, a small yet profound victory over the winter's tyranny. Carrying the wooden buckets from the well back to the hut, though still arduous and bone-chilling, felt less like a desperate battle for survival and more like a simple, manageable chore. The taste of fresh, untainted water, free from the metallic temps of melted snow and the bitterness of desperation, was a forgotten luxury, a burst of pure, unadulterated sensation that flooded your parched mouth and invigorated your weary spirit. Outside, the snow itself began its slow, inevitable retreat, a gradual surrender to the sun's returning power. Patches of dark, damp earth began to emerge first in small, irregular, almost hesitant shapes around the bases of ancient trees and along south-facing walls where the sun lingered longest, appearing like old wounds, slowly opening on the white, pristine landscape. These dark patches, though muddy and cold beneath your feet, were a sight more beautiful than any summer flower, any vibrant bloom. They meant the ground was preparing to breathe again, to stretch its tired limbs after a long slumber. The paths, once treacherous with unforgiving black ice, became muddy quagmires, difficult to navigate with their sucking, pulling grip, but navigable nonetheless. Every squelch of mud beneath your worn boots was a sound of promise, a messy but undeniably welcome sign of life's messy, determined return. The desperate, all-consuming search for food remained, a constant low thrum of anxiety, but it was now tinged with a new, fragile, yet persistent hope. Scavenging for forgotten, hidden roots became slightly less futile. The soil, though still mostly frozen and resistant, offered a grudging, reluctant give under your probing fingers. You'd find a few hardy shoots, brown and withered, seemingly lifeless, but undeniably edible, a true unexpected treasure that brought a surge of quiet gratitude. The hunters ventured out with renewed, though still cautious, optimism. Their returns were still meager, but there were occasional, precious successes, a scrawny rabbit, a few trapped birds, signaling that the forest was stirring, its hidden life slowly beginning to awaken. The whispers in the village shifted from deep despair to tentative, almost giddy plans for spring planting, for repairing homes ravaged by the cold, for rebuilding what winter had so cruelly taken and relentlessly destroyed. Community ties, though scarred and stretched thin by the ordeal, began to tentatively reunite, slowly, painfully, like mended cloth. The shared ordeal of survival, which had once driven people apart into isolated, suspicious units, now offered a fragile but tangible basis for cautious reconnection, for a hesitant reaching out. A neighbor whose eyes were once filled with suspicion might now offer a small, unsolicited helping hand, a silent acknowledgement of shared resilience, a tentative olive branch. The profound relief of seeing a familiar face, still gaunt but undeniably alive, brought a quiet comfort that settled deep in your chest. The unburied dead, their presence a constant, haunting shadow over the living, now became a solemn communal task. As the ground mercifully softened, the grim work of grave digging began, a physically arduous but spiritually necessary ritual of closure performed with a shared, quiet reverence that spoke volumes of their enduring respect. Sickness, though still a very real threat, a lingering specter, felt less absolute, less like an inescapable death sentence. The mere promise of fresh air, of less cramped and smoke-filled living conditions, offered a flicker of profound relief, a breath of hope. The weakened, emaciated bodies, racked by months of deprivation, longed for the true healing warmth of sunshine, for the green remedies of the coming spring, for food that tasted of vibrant life, not salt and wood. The mere thought of warmth brought a physical easing of the constant, aching cold that had permeated every cell. Hope, that fragile, almost forgotten emotion, began to bloom, tiny and vulnerable, like the first snowdrop pushing through frozen earth. but undeniably present, a defiant green shoot in a barren landscape. It was not a boisterous, joyous hope, no grand exultation, but a quiet, tenacious one, a deep-seated, stubborn belief that endured through the very darkest hours. The isolation, too, began its slow, creaking break. The frozen rivers, once impassable, unyielding barriers that severed all connection, groaned and cracked, giving way to rushing, turbulent, icy currents roaring with new life. Trade routes, slowly, painfully, began to reopen, tentative paths forged through lingering snow. Word from distant villages, once a far-fetched, almost impossible dream, began to trickle in, carried by brave, exhausted travelers, bringing news of other survivors, of a wider world still existing beyond the confines of your own suffering and isolation. The vast, hostile white world outside the hut began to lose its terrifying, monotonous uniformity, slowly revealing familiar landmarks, signs of enduring life, a promise of paths rediscovered. Time began to flow again, each day a distinct step away from the frozen stasis, a measurable progression. The past, still painful and etched deep into your memory, became a harsh but invaluable lesson, a brutal trial overcome. The future, though still uncertain and shrouded in the mists of recovery, held the undeniable promise of growth, of renewal, of a chance to rebuild. The wind's song changed. Its mournful howl of despair softened to a gentle sigh, a quiet whisper of change. The air carried the earthy scent of damp soil and melting snow, a potent, intoxicating promise of fertility, of life's unstoppable cycle. Spring was not just a myth, it was coming. The deep winter had demanded everything, had stripped you bare, but it had not broken you. You had endured. And as the first hesitant, gentle warmth touched your face, a subtle caress, you knew, with a certainty that reached into your very bones, that life, stubborn and relentless, would find a way to return. The air itself underwent a profound transformation, no longer holding that brittle, bone-aching cold that had permeated every fiber of your being for what felt like an eternity. Instead, it carried the distinct, invigorating scent of damp earth, of melting snow, and a faint, almost forgotten sweetness, a delicate perfume of burgeoning life. The sun, a distant, mythical entity for so long, finally felt like a true sun. Its rays were still weak, thin, a pale imitation of summer's fiery embrace, but they delivered a tangible warmth to your skin, a sensation so profound and unexpected it often brought tears to your eyes, a mixture of relief and disbelief. The vast, oppressive white world, which had seemed endless and unconquerable, began its slow, grudging retreat, breaking up into mottled patterns, revealing more and more of the dark, rich, promising soil beneath. The very land seemed to sigh, audibly exhaling the long, frozen breath of winter, stirring from its deep slumber. The thaw, once a hesitant trickle, gained undeniable momentum. Rivers, which had been solid, unyielding highways of ice for months, now roared with the powerful, insistent sound of rushing, icy meltwater, their currents turbulent and alive. The roads, which had been impassable drifts, burying villages in isolated white, slowly transformed into thick, clinging mud, difficult and exhausting to traverse, but no longer life-threatening barriers. Weary travelers, their faces thin and etched with hardship, began to appear like ghosts from a forgotten world, bringing whispers of news from other distant villages. Who had survived, who had tragically not tales of unimaginable hardship, endured and quiet miracles achieved. The wider world was slowly, painfully, tentatively reconnecting, stitching itself back together. Inside the humble hut, life stirred with renewed purpose, a palpable shift in the collective energy. The fire, though still necessary for comfort and to banish the lingering chill, no longer consumed every spare thought or precious piece of wood. You could finally begin the arduous, yet satisfying, task of deep cleaning. scraping away months of accumulated grime and smoke-darkened layers from the walls and ceiling. The pervasive stench of stale air, unwashed bodies, and animal waste began to dissipate, slowly replaced by the clean, fresh, earthy smell carried in on the gentle, awakening breezes. The animals, feeling the warmth in their very bones, stretched and moved with a new, tentative vigor. The chickens, though still scrawny from their winter ordeal, began to scratch eagerly in the mud outside, their clucking more animated. And the goat, though still lean, bleated with a new, almost cheerful cadence, a clear sign of renewed spirits. The most profound and miraculous change, however, was in the land itself, the very ground beneath your feet. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly at first, a secret whispered by the earth. Tiny, defiant specks of green began to emerge from the still, cold, damp soil. Not the vibrant, lush green of high summer, but a muted, tender shade, almost gray-green, pushing through the last stubborn patches of melting snow and clinging mud. These were the first fragile blades of grass, the tentative, courageous shoots of hardy wild onions, the very first desperate attempts of nature to reclaim the world from winter's icy embrace. You'd kneel, your knees aching from months of crouching, to touch them, marveling at their exquisite fragility and their immense, stubborn, undeniable will to live. They were not just plants, they were powerful heralds, living proof that the cycle would turn, that life, in all its resilience, would inevitably return. The focus in the village shifted dramatically from mere survival to the arduous collaborative task of rebuilding and preparing for a new season. Tools, long buried under snow or tucked away for winter, were unearthed, sharpened with care, and meticulously prepared for the all-important task of planting. Fields, which had lain long buried under featureless snow, were surveyed with a mixture of desperate hope and profound trepidation, their barren expanse a stark reminder of past scarcity. The ground was still mostly too cold, too wet for immediate sowing. Its consistency like thick porridge, but the promise of fertility was undeniably there, an intoxicating aroma in the air. Seeds, hoarded through the brutal winter, felt like precious miracles in your calloused palm. Tiny, potent capsules of future life containing the possibility of abundance. The chilling memory of famine, however, was fresh and raw, etched deep into the collective consciousness. Every single seed felt infinitely precious, a testament to what you had endured, and a desperate, all-or-nothing gamble on the coming harvest. Community gatherings, once rare and somber affairs dictated by necessity, took on a strikingly different tone. The hushed desperation of winter gave way to a cautious, almost quiet excitement, a palpable stirring of collective hope. People emerged from their huts, pale and thin, their movements still stiff, but with a new, unmistakable light in their eyes, a glimmer of resilience. They exchanged stories of their winter, grim tales of unimaginable loss mingled with quiet triumphs of personal endurance. The unburied dead from the deep winter were finally laid to rest, a somber, profoundly communal ritual that brought both immense sorrow and, paradoxically, a powerful sense of closure, allowing the living to truly grieve. It was a time of painful reckoning, of acknowledging the immense, brutal cost of winter, but also of reaffirming the deep, unbreakable bonds that remained between them, forged in the crucible of shared suffering. The children, too, began to regain their youthful, irrepressible energy. Their thin legs, once listless and slow, now ran with surprising speed through the squelching mud. Splashing and laughing with abandon, their voices thin but vibrant and full of life. They played simple games that mimicked the adults' vital chores, gathering sticks and pretending to plant seeds, their innocence a sharp contrast to the hardships they had endured. Their laughter, a sound unheard for what felt like endless months, was music to your ears, a clear, unmistakable sign that the world was slowly, tentatively healing, finding its rhythm again. Their renewed vigor was a potent, heartening reminder of why you had endured. Why every bitter, hungry, shivering day had been worth fighting through. A living testament to resilience. The suffocating feeling of being locked in began to dissipate, dissolving like morning mist. The air currents brought new scents, new sounds, carried from far beyond the village boundaries. Birds, small and cautious at first, began to return, their hesitant chirps anew, tentative melody in the previously silent, desolate world. The occasional appearance of a deer, thin but undeniably alive, or a fox, its fur still thick and winter-worn, was a cause for quiet wonder, a silent celebration, a clear sign that the larger, natural world was also stirring from its long, enforced slumber. Hope, no longer a faint, almost invisible flicker, was now a steady, if still fragile, flame burning with a quiet determination. You found yourself looking to the sky differently. No longer just a source of cold and gloom, it was now a vast, open expanse, promising light and warmth, a canvas of endless possibility. The clouds, though still present, seemed to drift with a new purpose, hinting at gentle, life-giving rains rather than harsh, suffocating snowstorms. Each sunset no longer felt like a terrifying descent into unending darkness, but a prelude to a shorter, more manageable night. A firm promise of a warmer, brighter dawn. Winter had stripped away everything but the essential, leaving behind a raw, profound appreciation for life's simplest, most fundamental gifts. The physical exhaustion remained, a deep, bone-weary fatigue that would linger for weeks, a ghost of winter's grip. The searing memories of hunger and cold would never truly fade, etched into the very fabric of your being. But there was a new, undeniable strength, too, forged in the fires of endurance, a quiet, unyielding resilience that now knew, intimately, what it was to survive the unimaginable. You understood the profound fragility of life, the harsh indifference of nature, but also the stubborn, undeniable power of life to reclaim what was lost, to push forward. Spring was not a gentle, easy arrival. It was a defiant, messy, glorious battle won, drop by drop of meltwater, blade by blade of green, breath by precious breath. It was a hard-won triumph, a testament to the unyielding promise of life. And with the sight of the first vibrant green shoots pushing fiercely through the earth, you knew, deep in your soul, with an absolute certainty, that you had made it through, that you had survived. The world, which had been trapped in winter's monochromatic grip for what felt like an eternity, now exploded into a riot of vivid colors, a tapestry of greens unseen for what felt like a lifetime. The muted grays, stark whites, and desolate browns of the cold season receded entirely, vanquished by vibrant emeralds, deep, rich forest hues, and the sudden joyful bursts of wildflowers. Small, defiant splashes of yellow, purple, and white dotting the meadows and riverbanks like spilled paint. The very air hummed with a renewed, almost intoxicating energy, no longer just a mere hint of thaw, but the undeniable, life-giving warmth of true, undeniable spring. Birdsong, a symphony of chirps, trills, and melodic calls, filled the air from the first tentative light of dawn until the last blush of dusk, a jubilant, ceaseless choir after months of chilling. Oppressive silence. Life outside the hut beckoned with an almost irresistible force, a siren call to awaken and participate. The heavy, damp, lingering smell of melting snow and stagnant water gave way to the rich, earthy, almost sweet aroma of fertile soil, freshly turned and invigorated by the gentle, insistent spring rains. Mud, once a hindrance and a sign of treachery, was now simply an unavoidable fact of life, churned up by eager footsteps and busy, determined hands, a messy but welcome sign of activity. The sun, reclaiming its rightful place, rose higher in the sky each day, staying longer, its light penetrating every last corner of the world, chasing away the lingering, persistent shadows of winter's tyranny. Its warmth was no longer a gentle caress, but a vibrant, all-encompassing embrace, a powerful, magnetic force urging all living things, from the smallest blade of grass to the tallest tree, to awaken, to grow, and to thrive. The village itself underwent a profound transformation, shedding its winter dormancy. The huddled, withdrawn figures of winter, once solely focused on inward survival, emerged with a renewed collective purpose that radiated through their tired frames. There was a palpable sense of urgency, a desperate yet hopeful drive that pushed everyone, young and old, into the open fields. This was the time for planting, the most critical, most precarious period of the entire year, when the future of their very existence was determined. The very act of turning the soil, of breaking the winter's hold on the earth, felt like a sacred ritual, a hopeful communion with the ancient, enduring land. Men and women, young and old, worked side by side, their movements still carrying the weary stiffness from winter's brutal toll, but now infused with a desperate, resilient energy, a stubborn refusal to be defeated. Hoes bit into the thawing ground with rhythmic thuds, breaking up clods of earth, preparing meticulous beds for the precious, life-giving seeds. Each seed, carefully cradled in the palm and then deliberately dropped into the receptive soil, was a tiny act of profound faith, a whispered prayer for a bountiful abundance that would banish the specter of future hunger. The children, finally freed from the suffocating confines of the hut, reveled in the boundless freedom of the outdoors. Their laughter, now loud and unrestrained, echoed joyously across the freshly turned fields, a vibrant, clear counterpoint to the rhythmic thud of tools and the murmurs of their elders. They chased each other through the burgeoning green, their thin legs gaining strength and coordination with every exuberant run, every playful stumble. They were put to work too, of course, gathering stray stones from the fields which would otherwise dull plows, or helping with lighter, less strenuous tasks, thus learning the ancient, indispensable rhythms of labor that had sustained their lives and generations before them. Their vibrant, renewed presence was a constant, powerful reminder of the future, of the generations who would inherit and reap what was so painstakingly sown today. The animals, too, found an almost euphoric, renewed vigor that matched the humans. The cows grazed eagerly on the fresh, tender shoots of grass, their coats quickly gaining a healthy sheen, their udders swelling with life-sustaining milk once more, a tangible sign of bounty. The chickens clucked contentedly, scratching vigorously for grubs and worms in the damp earth, their precious eggs returning, small miracles of sustained life and nourishment. Lambs and goat kids, wobbly-legged and full of boundless, playful energy, pranced and leaped through the meadows, their high-pitched bleats and gentle baas adding to the joyful cacophony that now filled the symphony of spring. The livestock, their numbers tragically diminished by winter's cruel culling, were now the living embodiment of renewed hope. Their improved health, a direct, undeniable reflection of the land's burgeoning generosity. Trade routes, once isolated and impassable by treacherous ice and snow, now buzzed with fervent activity. Merchants, their carts loaded not only with precious goods, but also with long-awaited news, brought a welcome influx of variety and vital communication, breaking the long silence. Markets once grim, desperate affairs held precariously on frozen rivers, now sprawled with a vibrant array of new produce, eager buyers, and the loud, bustling cacophony of renewed commerce, a testament to returning life. Word spread rapidly between villages, stories of shared survival, practical strategies for optimal planting, and the inevitable rumors of distant conflicts or new, exciting opportunities. The world, which had been fractured and isolated by winter, was now vibrant with connectivity, a network of resilient communities. Despite the profound, almost overwhelming sense of renewed hope, the lingering shadows of winter persisted, a subtle, constant reminder of what had been endured. The gaunt, hollow faces of many, though now touched by the sun's gentle warmth, served as stark reminders of the pervasive hunger and suffering endured. The empty spaces by hearths where loved ones had succumbed to the cold or illness were a constant, quiet ache, a silent testament to the lives lost. The arduous labor of spring planting was not just hard work. It was a desperate, relentless race against time. A vital effort to compensate for winter's crushing losses to plant enough to survive the next cycle. Every late frost, every unseasonable, chilling rain brought a fresh wave of visceral anxiety, a deep-seated, almost primal fear that the cruel cycle of suffering might return. The vulnerability remained, a fragile thread, but it was now tempered by decisive action, by the physical act of striving, of building, of pushing for a better tomorrow. However, the overwhelming feeling was one of profound relief and an almost intoxicating sense of renewed purpose. The days were long, stretching from dawn till dusk, and the work was undeniably back-breaking, demanding every ounce of remaining strength. But it was work infused with deep meaning, with a powerful, undeniable promise of life and future abundance. The ache in your muscles at the end of each long day was no longer from the penetrating cold, but from productive, hopeful effort, a satisfying fatigue. As evening finally fell, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple, you returned to the humble hut, exhausted but deeply satisfied. The rich scent of fresh earth clinging to your clothes like a second skin. The shared meal, though still simple and unadorned, tasted of hope and hard-won resilience, of victory against the odds. The bright, unrestrained laughter of children, the low murmur of contented animals, the gentle rustle of new leaves unfurling on the trees. These were the unmistakable sounds of a world reborn, vibrant and alive. You watched the tiny, tenacious green shoots pushing upward, reaching with silent determination for the life-giving sun, a mirror of your own slow, determined rise from the crushing depths of winter. The earth, your harsh master and ultimate provider, was once again showing its merciful, bountiful face, its generosity a profound blessing. The scars of winter remained, etched deeply into the very fabric of the land and into the tired, resilient faces of the people, but they were now scars of survival, indelible marks of a long, brutal battle bravely won. Life had burst forth, undeniable and vibrant, a testament to its own stubborn, glorious will to continue to thrive against all odds. The time of simply enduring was over. The time of renewed growth, of rebuilding, and of cautious, hopeful living had truly begun. The sweet promises of spring had indeed swept through the village. A fragile but undeniable tide of new hope carried on every green shoot and every insistent birdsong. Yet, winter hadn't fully retreated, not just from the steel-gray skies that occasionally still threatened, but from the very marrow of the villagers' bones and the depths of their souls. Their bodies still carried the profound, bone-deep fatigue of sustained hunger and relentless exertion. The village, though seemingly revitalized, bore the deep, visible scars of its brutal ordeal. Many hearths now held an extinguished family line, a vacant chair that echoed with absence, a chilling reminder of those claimed by the cold. The survivors carried on, yes, but often alongside the spectral presence of those they'd lost. Their grief a silent, constant companion. The crops were rising, pushing through the thawing earth, a testament to enduring life. But the soil itself, the very ground they tilled, bore the indelible legacy of months of pervasive frost and severe nutrient depletion. While some fields, by sheer luck or the blessing of a hidden spring, burst forth with promising tender green, others remained stubbornly meager, their growth stunted, starkly revealing barren patches and the specific, irreparable losses that winter had inflicted upon the land. Every single sprouting seed, each fragile seedling, was a silent, potent reminder of the past scarcity, of bellies that had gnawed with emptiness. Every stunted plant, every patch of reluctant growth stood as irrefutable proof of the ongoing struggle, a battle far from over. Farmers looked upon their fields with a desperate, burgeoning hope, but an unsettling question always lingered, a cold dread in the back of their minds. Would it truly be enough? enough to sustain them through the next year, enough to rebuild, to forget. And then, unexpectedly, spring itself, often hailed as a savior, brought its own insidious set of new challenges. A late frost, sudden and biting with a malicious precision, could sweep across the fields in the dead of night, turning rows of newly sprouted potatoes and tender beans black and lifeless by morning. What had been a promise of life became a stark, chilling landscape of death. Spring rains, instead of a welcome, life-giving blessing, might turn into relentless, chilling downpours that seemed to stretch for days, delaying crucial planting by weeks, or worse, rotting precious seeds directly in the sodden ground before they even had a chance to sprout. Every abnormal weather event, every unseasonable chill, every unexpected storm sent a fresh, visceral wave of fear through the villagers. It was a primal dread that winter, like a lurking predator, might somehow return, defying the very seasons to snatch away their nascent harvest. These new, unexpected difficulties served as bitter, painful reminders of how truly fragile life was, how precarious their existence remained, and that the struggle for survival was, in a brutal reality, never truly over. It merely shifted its form. Sickness, too, hadn't simply vanished with the retreat of the cold, as if banished by the sun. Weakened bodies, their immune systems compromised by months of starvation and constant cold, remained tragically vulnerable to new ailments that often flared up with the first deceptive warmth of spring. A hacking cough passed from one child to another, or a rapidly spreading fever, could still decimate another family, threatening even those who had made it through the deepest, darkest winter. While the fresher, less confined air of spring offered some physical relief and a sense of freedom from the claustrophobic huts, these new, insidious threats served as a chilling, undeniable truth. Death didn't only lie in wait in winter's cold, bone-crushing embrace. It lurked insidiously, patiently, even in the supposedly benevolent warmer months, waiting for its moment to strike. The village graveyard, already swelled by winter's victims, prepared for more, a stark testament to life's persistent fragility. The collective mood in the village, though undoubtedly lifted from winter's soul-crushing despair, was still remarkably far from joyous celebration. It was more a pervasive, quiet hum, a collective vigilance that bordered on exhaustion. Children, while undeniably more energetic in their play, their laughter now echoing across the damp fields, still carried a subtle shadow in their eyes, a lingering knowledge of hunger and loss from the winter they had endured. Elders, though they had somehow managed to endure and persist, bore the deep, indelible pain of the past etched onto their weathered faces, and rarely spoke of the future with genuine optimism, their words often tinged with caution, their hard-won wisdom passed down through generations, served as a constant, sobering reminder that every small victory gained had come at a profound cost, and that true, unburdened comfort could never be fully attained, not in this harsh, unforgiving world. The animals, the silent witnesses to winter's brutality, were also in a slow, agonizing recovery. Many remained sickly, gaunt, their bones prominent beneath their stilting coats, and some, tragically, never fully regained their strength or health. The numbers of livestock lost to the brutal cold and starvation were visible gaps in the herds, an undeniable loss that would be felt by the village for a long, painful time to come, impacting their ability to feed themselves. While eggs and milk gradually returned, small daily blessings, the overall reduced animal population was a silent, stark reminder of potential future food shortages and the increased fragility of their entire community should winter return with similar, unforgiving severity. The joy of new births was tempered by the lingering ache of absence. Though trade routes had indeed reopened, bringing a welcome flow of goods and news, the pervasive effects of winter's prolonged disruption were still profoundly palpable. Goods were significantly more expensive, their prices inflated by scarcity, and some essential items remained maddeningly scarce, frustrating renewed efforts to rebuild. News from distant villages, even those that had miraculously survived the same brutal season, indicated that everyone faced similar, enduring hardships, and that widespread aid was limited, often non-existent. The world was reconnected, yes, but these connections were scarred, woven with threads of shared suffering, and the clear recognition that a long, arduous process of healing and rebuilding lay ahead, stretching far into the future. The simple act of obtaining a necessary tool could become an agonizing negotiation. The first spring rains and the tentative return of greenery, though bringing a rebirth of hope and a promise of fertility, felt thin and precarious, a fragile veneer over deep-seated wounds. Spring was not an ultimate end to their trials, but rather a brief, hard-won breathing space in an unending, relentless cycle of nature's indifference. The pervasive shadow of the past winter lingered, a cold whisper in every breath they took, in every anxious, expectant glance at the budding fields, in every meal that, despite appearances, still felt agonizingly small. People continued to move forward, yes, their will unbroken, but with every step, every moment of work. They never truly forgot how close winter had been, how devastating its touch, and how life would inevitably test them again sooner or later. Despite the burgeoning beauty and renewed activity around them, they knew, deep in their bones, that the struggle for survival never truly ceased. It merely changed its form, waiting in the wings for its next cruel act. The sun now truly held dominion, its warmth a tangible, life-giving force that not only thawed the soil, but banished the last lingering chills from the very air, though not entirely from the deep-set bones of the villagers. The vibrant, almost impossibly rich green of high summer blanketed the fields, stretching to the horizon, a stark, almost blinding contrast to the monochrome nightmare of months past, a season that now felt like a distant, terrible dream. Yet, for all the renewed light and burgeoning bounty, the village itself remained a living tableau of enduring scars. Every new furrow plowed, every hastily but sturdily built fence post, every meticulously mended roof beam, spoke not just of hopeful growth, but of the raw, brutal devastation that had necessitated such tireless rebuilding. The immediate physical marks of winter were gradually fading, softened by sun and rain, but its deeper, more profound imprints on the land, and, more significantly, on the people, were indelible, woven into the very fabric of their existence. The memory of the biting wind, the gnawing hunger, the silent despair, these lingered like a phantom ache, a constant, low thrum beneath the surface of daily life, a quiet hum that the summer's warmth could never fully extinguish. The faces of the villagers, though no longer gaunt and hollow, carried a different, more permanent kind of etching. Lines of worry that had deepened with cold and unrelenting hunger now seemed permanently set around eyes that had simply seen too much, eyes that held an ancient wariness. Laughter, while more frequent and occasionally unrestrained, often held a sober, almost melancholic undertone, a constant, gentle reminder of the many voices that were now eternally silent, buried beneath the softening earth. The communal gatherings, once a source of simple warmth and vital connection in the harsh winter, now carried a solemn, almost sacred weight. They celebrated the burgeoning golden harvest. Yes, but always with the quiet, respectful acknowledgement of the empty spaces at their tables, the families irrevocably broken, fragmented by loss. The names of the lost were whispered, not with despair, but with a quiet, profound reverence. Their legacies integrated into the village's collective memory, a permanent, painful, yet vital part of their ongoing story. The shared trauma had bound them tighter in some ways, creating a fierce protective solidarity. But it had also created fissures of unspoken grief, a collective burden borne in silence, understood without words. The children, those miraculous emblems of resilience, though running free and vibrant in the summer sun, their laughter echoing across the fields, were not entirely untouched by the ordeal. The games they instinctively played sometimes eerily mirrored the struggles of the harsh season. Finding food in the snow, building makeshift shelter, escaping the frost's bite. While their small bodies were visibly mending, growing stronger with each passing day, their young minds had witnessed hardships and privations far beyond their tender years, leaving subtle, unarticulated marks on their burgeoning psyches. Yet it was precisely in their remarkable resilience, their astonishing ability to find joy in the simplest things, that the villagers saw their most profound and enduring hope. Their capacity to forget, to adapt, to simply be in the present moment was a powerful, daily reminder that life, no matter how brutal and unforgiving, always finds a way to assert itself, to push forward. It was in their untainted wonder at a butterfly-esque dance or a new bloom-esque scent that the adults found a sliver of forgotten innocence, a fragile reason to smile without reserve, a brief respite from the ever-present weight of memory. The bounty of summer, the rich promise of a full harvest, was undeniably a blessing. A miracle after months of deprivation, but it was also a relentless taskmaster. The previous winter had instilled in every villager a new, almost obsessive vigilance, a deep-seated caution that bordered on paranoia. Every single day was now a race against the unpredictable whims of nature, a constant battle against unseen threats. Farmers meticulously monitored their crops, their eyes constantly scanning for the first hint of blight, the insidious presence of pests, or the sudden, terrifying approach of unexpected storms that could, in a single hour, devastate months of arduous labor. Every cloud on the horizon was scrutinized with an almost desperate intensity. Every subtle change in the wind's direction analyzed for portents, for warnings of impending doom. The stored food from autumn, once perhaps taken for granted, was now mentally, almost religiously, counted and rationed in their minds long before it was even harvested and brought into the granaries. There was no longer any casual waste. Every single morsel, every precious kernel, every dried root was treated as invaluable, a sacred trust, a life-saving treasure. The primal instinct to hoard, born of deep-seated fear and trauma, now constantly competed with the essential need to share and ensure communal survival. A delicate and often precarious balance in their fractured, slowly mending trust. The ghost of starvation was a constant companion, whispering caution with every generous impulse, a shadow even in the brightest sunlight. The trade routes, while mercifully open again, buzzed with an activity that also bore witness to a world still very much in recovery. Merchants brought not only goods, but also grim news of other communities that had fared far worse, chilling stories of desperate migrations, of entire villages utterly abandoned, their inhabitants vanished or succumbed. This news reinforced a grim, sobering understanding among the villagers. Their own survival was not a universal guarantee, but a hard one, tenuous victory, unique to their own extraordinary resilience and, perhaps, a sheer stroke of luck. Help from outside was not to be expected, not reliably. They were, fundamentally, alone in facing the unyielding cycle of the seasons, reliant only on their own strength and solidarity. The world outside their valley, vast and indifferent, offered little comfort or promise of salvation, reinforcing their self-reliance. Their fate was in their own hands, molded by the land and the sky. As the long, sun-drenched summer days began their inevitable, subtle shortening, giving way to the gentle lengthening of shadows, a familiar, almost imperceptible shift in the air, a whisper of cooler nights brought with it a renewed, almost ritualistic sense of preparation. Firewood was being gathered earlier than ever before, more diligently, stacked higher, and with greater care. Each log a small act of defiance against the coming cold, a tangible assertion of control. Repairs to huts, from patching a leaky roof to shoring up a weak wall, were made with a renewed sense of urgency and meticulous precision. No detail deemed too small to prevent future suffering. Every crack a potential conduit for winter's cruel embrace. Livestock were carefully counted, their health more rigorously monitored, every cough, every limp noted with a worried frown, their well-being intrinsically linked to the village's survival. The brutal lessons of the recent winter, etched so deeply into their collective memory, were being applied with a grim, unwavering determination. It wasn't despair that fueled this activity, but a profound, almost spiritual acknowledgement of what was to come, of the cyclical nature of their existence, of the eternal dance between life and the elements. The village stood, a testament to its shared survival, yet forever changed by the crucible it had passed through. The harsh winter had stripped them bare, exposing the raw, unyielding core of their humanity, revealing both their vulnerabilities and their immense strength. It had taught them, in the most brutal way imaginable, that life was a continuous, often agonizing struggle against the indifferent elements, a constant, precarious dance on the very edge of oblivion. But it had also, paradoxically, shown them the astonishing, almost miraculous depth of their own resilience, the profound power of collective will when unified by a common threat, and the simple yet utterly profound value of warmth, of sustenance, of human connection, of a shared breath in the darkness. They carried their losses, a silent weight that shaped their silence, but also an indelible strength forged in the heart of winter itself. As the first crisp breath of autumn stirred the golden fields, carrying the rich scent of drying grain and a faint, unmistakable chill, the villagers looked towards the horizon. They had survived. And they knew, with a certainty born of fire and ice, etched into their very souls, that they would survive again. The cycle would turn, as it always had, bringing both hardship and bounty. But this time, they faced it with the unforgettable wisdom of having walked through the deepest winter and emerged irrevocably marked, deeply scarred, but ultimately, miraculously unbroken. The village breathed a living, beating heart on the edge of the wilderness, forever aware of the thin veil between life and nothingness, ready for whatever the next turn of the great wheel might bring. Their history was now one of enduring triumph.